All right, so ready to dive into a career path that's a little more intense than just, sorting your recycling.
Yeah, forget sorting newspapers. We're talking hazmat suits, respirators, the whole 9 yards. We're going deep on hazardous waste technicians today.
Hazardous waste. Okay, so not your average garbage collector then. I've got a stack of sources here that promise a glimpse into this world, and honestly, I'm a little nervous to jump in.
I don't blame you. These are the folks dealing with the really nasty stuff, substances that could, without exaggeration, melt your face off or send you to the hospital with a single whiff.
Okay, that's a visual I wasn't quite ready for. But it does make you realize this is serious business. And what I find interesting from what I've read is it's not as simple as just carting stuff away.
No, not at all. People picture what? Garbage trucks, landfills, the end. But it's way more complex. These technicians are almost like detectives, figuring out what they're dealing with, how dangerous it really is.
So it's more than just, is this toxic?
Oh, much more. You've got to understand the chemical composition, if it's going to explode on you, how it impacts the environment long term.
Uh.
It's a whole science.
So they're like waste whisperers, figuring out his secrets to neutralize it or something.
Exactly. That's where those hazardous traits come in. Ignitability, corrosiveness, reactivity. These aren't just scary words, they're crucial information.
Okay, break it down for me. Ignitability seems straightforward enough, but
It's not just about if something burns. How easily does it catch fire? At what temperature? How intensely? That all dictates how you handle it, store it, get rid of it.
right, right. And corrosiveness, I'm assuming that's the melting my face off part.
Pretty much. Think substances that eat through metal. Now imagine that on skin. So handling it requires serious precautions.
Okay. And reactivity. What's that all about? It sounds ominous.
This one's a bit wilder. Think of stuff that can explode if you mix it with the wrong thing, even something as simple as water in some cases.
So these guys basically have to be walking chemistry encyclopedias on top of everything else.
Exactly. They have to know their stuff because one wrong move can be disastrous.
Speaking of knowing their stuff, one of these sources mentions plasma arc technology. What in the world is that?
You know those sci-fi movies where they disintegrate things with lasers? It's kind of like that, but for hazardous waste. Super high temperatures, hotter than the sun even, to break the waste down into basic elements.
So instead of burying the problem, they're just, what, vaporizing it?
In a way, yeah. Turning harmful stuff into something far less scary. It's pretty amazing.
It does sound amazing, but I imagine even with technology that advanced, there's got to be a downside.
You're right, it's not perfect. Plasma arc is still pretty new, and it takes a ton of energy to pull off, so it's expensive. Plus, we're still figuring out the long-term effects on the environment. It's not a magic bullet yet.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it, this whole other world of innovation happening that most people are totally oblivious to.
Right. And it makes sense because it's not like the waste just disappears.
Right.
All this new tech, new materials we use,
Yeah.
it all turns into waste eventually.
And someone's got to deal with it. Speaking of dealing with it, these sources mention regulations a lot. It sounds like it's not just about knowing your chemistry, but knowing the rule book too, huh?
Absolutely. This isn't some free-for-all, you know. You can't just toss this stuff in the dumpster out back. We're talking about a whole web of rules, regulations, all designed to protect people and the environment.
So like a rule book for every substance.
Yeah.
If you spill chemical X, do this.
Kind of like that. You've got agencies like the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, setting standards for air and water quality, how each type of waste is treated, stored, disposed of. They've got rules for all of it. Then there's OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, making sure workers aren't taking unnecessary risks, proper gear, handling procedures, what to do in an emergency. Those guys cover it all.
So you don't end up accidentally mixing the wrong things and creating a toxic cloud because you didn't read the memo, right?
Exactly. These guys are dealing with serious stuff, so the margin for error is razor thin. They need to be on top of it all.
Makes you wonder what kind of person thrives in that environment, Always on edge, following strict rules, dealing with potentially dangerous stuff.
Yeah, it's not for everyone, that's for sure. You've got to be comfortable with science, obviously, detail-oriented to a T. But it's also the mental aspect, Being able to stay calm under pressure, think on your feet when something goes wrong, make decisions with incomplete information, sometimes life or death ones.
Now that sounds intense. Actually, one source mentioned this situation. A technician had to respond to a chemical spill at a factory. Some barrels weren't labeled right, got mixed up. Next thing you know, you've got this highly toxic gas leak.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this technician, they had to think fast, evacuate the area, Neutralize a reaction before it spread. Talk about a high-stakes career.
No kidding. That's a perfect example, too, of how it's not just about the science. You've got to be able to communicate clearly under pressure.
Right.
You're dealing with factory workers who are freaking out, maybe even injured, first responders who need to know what they're walking into.
It's like being a hazardous waste therapist or something.
Exactly. You got to calm people down, explain complex stuff in a way anyone can understand, all while preventing an environmental catastrophe. So yeah, communication is key.
That's a good point. So we've got this picture of the day-to-day, the critical thinking, the crisis management. But where does someone even begin in a career like this? What's the path look like?
Well, like most careers, you're not jumping into the deep end right away, right? You'd start with an entry-level position.
Okay, so what? Learning the ropes, getting your hands dirty, but not literally because safety first.
Exactly. You're assisting the experienced techs, transporting, disposing of the less hazardous stuff. But most importantly, you're learning those safety protocols inside and out.
Right. Got to make sure you don't accidentally set off a chain reaction on day one. But once you've got the basics down, where do you go from there?
Well, usually you'd move up to a junior technician role, more responsibility, starting to conduct inspections, maybe even helping come up with those waste management plans for different clients.
So that's where the people skills start to come in. Explain to a business owner why they can't just dump that mysterious goo in the backyard.
Exactly. Diplomacy becomes a key skill, not just knowing the science. You're the bridge between that technical world and people who are just trying to run their business or, live their lives.
Makes sense. So you've got entry-level junior technician. What's the next step up for someone who really wants to make this a career?
That's where you get into senior technician territory. Now you're not just handling the waste yourself, you're overseeing entire operations, training the new guys, making sure everyone's following those strict regulations. Basically, you are the expert at that point.
And I imagine that comes with a whole other level of pressure too, right? You're responsible for not just your own safety, but everyone else's too.
Definitely. And for those who are really driven, who want to shape the entire field, there's one more level: hazardous waste manager.
Okay, so that's the top of the food chain. What does that even look like day to day?
Think big picture: strategic planning, budgets, working with government agencies on new regulations, maybe even pushing for new technologies to be adopted. It's a whole different ballgame.
Wow, so you could go from carefully labeling barrels to advising policymakers on how to handle the country's most dangerous substances. That's a heck of a career trajectory.
And what's really interesting is even if someone does this for a few years and moves on, they come away with incredibly valuable skills. Attention to detail, staying calm in a crisis, that communication stuff we talked about, that translates to so many other fields.
It's like a crash course in some of the most in-demand skills out there. Plus, you're doing something that genuinely makes a difference, helping protect people, the environment.
Right. Which brings us back to that plasma arc technology. If that takes off, it could dramatically change the job outlook for these technicians.
Instead of hands-on work, they'd be more like, what? Engineers managing these high-tech disposal systems.
Exactly. The focus could shift from physical labor and risk management to more technical expertise, operating complex machinery, analyzing data, even troubleshooting those systems when they inevitably break down.
It's fascinating to think about. We always hear about jobs being replaced by robots, but here's a case where technology could completely transform a profession, creating a demand for a whole new set of skills.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that no matter what field you're in, things are always changing, and being willing to adapt and learn new things is never going to steer you wrong.
Well said. So for anyone listening who's intrigued by a career that's part science, part problem solving, with a dash of, saving the world thrown in, maybe hazardous waste is your calling. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's definitely a field where you can make a real difference.
And hey, maybe you'll even get to operate a plasma arc reactor someday, right? Who wouldn't want to do that?
There you go. It's got to be the best job perk ever.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fascinating look into a world most people don't even think about, but one that's crucial to keeping our planet safe. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.